Tonight, as the world settles into its usual routines and the sky fades into a calm, muted violet, something different begins to take shape far away from the quiet of living rooms and late-night screens. A shift. A tremor. A sound barely detectable unless you know where to listen. Somewhere in the heart of West Africa, where the desert wind carries more truth than official statements ever will, a young leader has stepped forward with a voice that refuses to bend. He stands there, as if the chaos swirling around him were nothing but dust passing through sunlight. His eyes, steady, his shoulders unshaken, the kind of presence that turns silence into anticipation. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and tonight the world is realizing something it never expected. Burkina Faso has stopped bowing, stopped waiting, stopped whispering. It has drawn a hard line in the sand, etched deeply enough that even the Atlantic winds cannot erase it. For decades, foreign flags flew over West African soil disguised under the comforting language of cooperation. Training missions, logistics hubs, strategic partnerships, words that seemed harmless, necessary, civil. But beneath them lived a reality few dared mention openly. These outposts were not built to defend West Africa. They were built to control it. Leaders knew it. Soldiers sensed it. Citizens accepted it because they felt they had no choice. Yet there comes a moment in every generation when someone refuses to carry the weight of an inherited silence. Tonight, that someone is Traoré, and his message cuts like a blade through the fog that has hung over the Sahel for too long. NATO and ECOWAS must stay within their boundaries or be pushed back into them. The words traveled fast. Across deserts, over borders, through diplomatic circles that thought they had already mapped the future of West Africa without ever asking its people. And as those words echoed, the atmosphere shifted. Something in the region's pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition. The message was not new. It was ancient. It was the same warning older African leaders whispered into dim conference rooms but never had the courage or leverage to announce to the world. Traoré simply said aloud what history had been waiting to hear. And as the message circulated, the world watched the horizon in Burkina Faso change shape. What once looked like an empty expanse now resembled a crossroads, a turning point that comes once in a century, when the path ahead is unclear but impossible to ignore. If history is a river, then this is the moment the current turns, bending in a direction that few expected and even fewer are prepared for. And somewhere between the shifting sands and the restless borders, a young nation begins to rise from beneath the shadows of superpowers that long positioned themselves as guardians of stability. The moment Traoré stepped up to the microphone, the room itself felt altered. There were no pauses, no softened words designed to appease distant capitals. He did not step lightly or whisper politely. His statement cracked through decades of diplomatic theater with the precision of a hammer shattering glass. He warned NATO-linked operations and ECOWAS structures that Burkina Faso would no longer tolerate foreign military encroachment under any disguise. It sounded sudden to those outside the region, but to those living in the Sahel, it was the only logical ending to a story that had simmered quietly for years. Traoré had been watching the patterns long before anyone realized it. The fuel convoys moving at strange hours, the unmarked flights that never made the news. The intelligence networks operating beneath the surface of official narratives. He studied it all, connected the dots no one else dared to touch, and when the full picture emerged, it was undeniable. West African territories, especially those of allied states, were being used as silent leverage points, pressure valves, mechanisms designed to squeeze dissenting nations whenever they stepped out of line. Burkina Faso was not a partner in this arrangement. It was a platform. And so the warning came not as a threat, but as a boundary. A boundary carved not in sand, but in the iron conviction of a leader who believes sovereignty must be defended even when the cost is enormous. The geopolitical moment favored him. ECOWAS was fractured, its strength more symbolic than real. After its failure to bend Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso, its once commanding voice grew faint. NATO itself had become stretched thin, tied up in European tensions and forced to monitor the Sahel from afar without the dominance it once enjoyed. And in the midst of this shift emerged the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, a newly formed bloc, united not by convenience, but by survival. For the first time in modern history, 3 neighboring African nations rejected the script written for them and began writing one of their own. Within that new script, Traoré's voice carried more weight than anyone expected. His warning was not only political, it was symbolic, a declaration that the era of quiet acceptance was over, that foreign troops would no longer roam unchallenged, that Burkina Faso would watch every movement, monitor every air route, track every logistic chain tied to foreign interests. It was a reminder that sovereignty means nothing if it is not enforced. And as these words drifted across the region, the imagery became unavoidable. NATO-linked installations in Ghana, Senegal, and Ivory Coast suddenly appeared less like benign outposts and more like watchtowers built on land that never belonged to them. For years, these watchtowers stared outward. But tonight, for the first time, someone is staring back. Someone who refuses to look away. While foreign analysts scrambled, Burkina Faso began tightening its internal structure. New intelligence grids, new border monitoring systems, quiet military reforms. A strategic repositioning that signaled one thing: this was no longer a nation playing defense. This was a nation preparing for whatever might come next, and the people felt it. From the streets of Ouagadougou to the villages along the northern frontiers, pride surged like a rising tide. Citizens spoke of sovereignty, the way older generations spoke of independence, not as a distant memory, but as a mission. This pride radiated through the population, but it also carried weight. A nation that claims sovereignty must prove it through stability, governance, economic resilience, and unity. The people expect more now, not only defiance but delivery. Food must move, borders must hold, markets must breathe. And every action Traoré takes is now watched through the eyes of millions who believe that their destiny is finally being reclaimed. Meanwhile, ECOWAS sits in confusion. The organization built upon the assumption of compliance now faces a member state that openly rejects foreign influence woven into its structure. Some leaders want a harsh response. Others fear the consequences. But all understand one reality: Burkina Faso has slipped beyond their grasp. Across the ocean, NATO's reaction is calm on the surface, but frantic underneath. Public statements remain diplomatic and composed, yet behind closed doors, assessments are rewritten. Access agreements reviewed, supply routes questioned. Because if Burkina Faso truly monitors their every movement, their influence in West Africa is no longer secure. Washington senses it, Paris feels it, Brussels calculates it. The fear is not Traoré. The fear is the vacuum his stance may create, one that Russia will fill with security and China with infrastructure. The Sahel could become the center of a global power struggle that reshapes Africa for decades. And yet, the most powerful reaction does not come from NATO or ECOWAS or any foreign capital. It comes from Mali and Niger, who stand behind Burkina Faso without hesitation. They make it clear that any pressure applied to one will be treated as pressure applied to all. A unified doctrine forms not in boardrooms, but in the desert sands. A shared sovereignty that binds the 3 nations together against any external threat. Across Africa, the announcement spreads like fire. Support flows from Mali, Niger, Guinea, and much of the Sahel. A movement rises, one built on the idea that Africa must define its own interests, its own alliances, its own future. And Traoré becomes the face of that movement, not by choice, but by inevitability. As all of this unfolds, ordinary people begin to feel the shift in their daily lives. Market vendors discuss geopolitics as if discussing weather. Teachers adjust history lessons to reflect a new era. Musicians create songs about sovereignty. Citizens feel as though they are living through a moment their grandchildren will learn about. But pride is accompanied by tension. Every new boundary invites new risks. Every declaration invites scrutiny. The nation stands like a drum pulled tight, one strike away from resonance or rupture. International powers watch closely. The CIA adjusts briefings. French intelligence updates assessments. Russian analysts applaud. Chinese strategists observe quietly. Everyone senses the same truth. The old map of West Africa is fading, and a new one is emerging in its place. Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads, illuminated only by the fire it carries within itself. There are paths ahead, some narrow, some long, some dangerous. One leads to strategic calm, another to controlled tension, another, the darkest, to confrontation. None are simple, none are safe. But what sets Burkina Faso apart now is not the path it chooses, it is the fact that it will choose for itself. Traoré's voice has made that unavoidable. And as the world absorbs the impact of his warning, the air grows still, like the moment before a storm. The question that hangs over every capital, every intelligence office, every border checkpoint is the same. What happens when a small nation dares the world to cross a line carved from its own history, its own struggle, its own unbroken resolve? Tonight, it feels as though Burkina Faso is standing before a vast wooden door, old and heavy, slowly creaking open. Beyond it lies uncertainty, opportunity, danger, and a map waiting to be redrawn. Whether the world steps through that door, or whether Burkina Faso steps through first, will determine the next chapter of the Sahel, and the ground beneath us is already trembling.